I like the way that the flying crank ghost has this sort of organic, flowing way of moving, and I wanted to capture that kind of motion from something that was much smaller and looked as though it had been captured in a globe. I was going to use it on my Mailbox 2.0, which is the very first video in this series. However, I couldn't find, no matter how much I scanned the internet, anybody that had done the flying crank ghost from underneath. They all are flying from the top using some usually fishing line or some string or something like that, and the mechanism is above. So I found a site where a guy did something similar from below, and he had multiple motors moving multiple parts. It was a true animatronic creature, and based on that I decided to do this little guy, and I really kind of liked the way he was turning out, but the motion just wasn't really going to be there. So I couldn't figure out really how to do it at first, and so what I decided to do was just give up and go ahead and make a regular flying crank ghost, just in miniature version, and you were going to either be able to see the mechanism, or I'd have to put some kind of a black dome on the top to cover it up, but it would still be hanging around inside that thing. Well, then I started really thinking about, how does the flying crank ghost do what it does so well? And I'll show you a little video I made on how that works and how I came up with my idea to finally succeed in putting the mechanism in underneath.
This is the motion of the flying crank ghost. As you can see, the crank, as it rotates, pulls the red line, which would be, say, fishing line, with maybe the head attached to the far right end, through a fixed point, shortening it. And as it turns around, the head goes up and down. But what I like is it sort of slows to a stop as it gets to one point before moving on. And I think that's what makes it so fluid, is that there's not a lot of motion at the top of the crank or the bottom of the crank stroke. Now, if you were to add 2 arms to this, then you would just add 2 more cranks that would each be basically doing the exact same motion, only 120 degrees out of phase with each other. And when I look at this, maybe because I'm a car guy, what I see is a piston and a cylinder. So I thought this motion might be able to be performed from below if I made sort of a 3-cylinder engine. But I needed to see it in person. I'm kind of a visual person, so I decided to make a little prototype. I made this little prototype out of just coat hangers, and you can see it's not perfect. It gets caught a little bit here and there. But if you look at the tops and pretend that Mickey Mouse were a hand and Darth Vader in the middle were the head, and the astronaut, that's supposed to be an astronaut helmet on the right, whereas another hand, you could kind of picture the motion that the ghost would take, and it's very similar to the flying crank ghost. So I decided to proceed with this design.
So I made this simple frame that slides pretty much perfectly inside of the mailbox post. Of course, it'll be out by the mailbox. It's just leftover piece. So everything's going to be based on that frame, and I think it's going to load in from the top. That way I can access it easily. So I'm about to weld this in place, and the battery was exactly the right height I needed to hold it where it belongs. Hope I can weld it up, tack it into place before the battery explodes. Okay, so here's the plate, and here's the top part of the frame. The rest goes below the table through the slot. And I've press fit in these 3 pieces of copper because I can't weld copper to steel. And although they won't go in, this one's pretty good. This one's not so great, and this one's the worst one of all. I can't push that down, at least not easily, but I can wiggle it, and the whole point is for it not to wiggle. So I think I'm going to have to put a second plate and come up and over and down like I did with the prototype, and hopefully that'll hold them in place. And then I think I might be able to just sort of epoxy them, you know, we use some JB Weld or something to hold them in there straight. Okay, earlier you saw me, saw that I had press fit these in. and they were all loosey-goosey. So what I did is I added a second plate down here. Actually, it was really painstakingly hard because apparently I made a mistake, and you can kind of see it here, I think, if you look carefully. This one and this one are 1 inch apart, but this one and this one are like almost 1.2, I think. And the only thing I can think of that I did wrong, because they were supposed to be 1 inch apart, was you know, I used a pair of calipers and I scratched a little scribe line, and I think when I went to drill or use the punch to make a little divot before drilling, I think I must have seen the wrong scratch line or something, because I made a plate, excuse me, I made this plate down here 1 inch apart, and then I went to put it on the top. It didn't work. On the bottom, it didn't work, and I realized that, you know, it wasn't fitting, and it was so far off, and I didn't understand what was going on. So I made a second plate that was 1 inch on spacing, and it didn't fit either. So I think I tried one on the top, and I thought, well, I'll make one for the bottom that would fit across here. The other one was too small or something. Anyway, neither one of them fit, and I was like, what's going on here? And then I measured here, and you can actually kind of visually see there's a bit of a wider gap. My finger sort of touches here, and it barely kind of doesn't there. So that's what was going wrong. So I made a plate down here. It was really a pain in the butt. That was too big, and then I cut the other one up and welded onto that, and then I put this in the table. Like, well, that's right. That's why I wasn't moving that. Idiot. Anyway, I put it in the table, and then I used a level. I leveled the top, the bottom, down here, and it turns out this plate and that plate are actually pretty parallel to each other. It's totally by accident. Well, not totally. So I made this 90 degrees in both planes, and then this one, and then this one, and hopefully they all came out parallel and in good working order, because I don't want anything to be crooked, otherwise it'll bind up. And the purpose of these, of course, is to act as a cylinder, and now I have pistons for my cylinder. And the reason I used the copper was because this is such a good fit. I do have a different pipe right here, which will also fit, but it's not as good of a fit. It's dissimilar metals, and, you know, the copper might corrode or something, but I'm thinking, if I lube it up, some things are painted and it's out on the post. It's only there for, you know, it's kind of out of the rain. It's going to be inside the bubble there. So I think it'll be fine. Maybe every year I have to re-lube it or something, clear it out. Earlier I did my cylinders. Now I have the piston, which moves in and out fairly freely. And if you follow the connecting rod down, here's the crankshaft, which turns pretty freely. So I'll have to make a piece that comes out and back down, making a true crankshaft that this will then attach to. And when I know that length, I'll be able to cut this to length and attach it. And you can see on the front, there's how the shaft will turn. I've got a castellated nut on there that I turn down to a circular shape, and in it will go this thing. It'll grab the crenellations in the castellated nut, which, you know, I'm having trouble doing that right now, but it will. And in fact, I can't go in the hole because I need to shave that down a little bit, but that will attach to the motor. And the reason I did it that way is because this needs to be flush here, and in fact it needs to be flush here, so maybe I won't be able to put the washer after all, but at least one on the inside for sure, and maybe one on the inside there. That'll capture it left and right. And but anyway, it's got to slide down into this tube, and then I want to be able to just sort of plug the motor in, and if I can get a shaft that fits down in there and then can turn, that'll do the trick. It'll be easy. I don't want to put screws here because I don't have good access that way. So if I can just put something out here to hold the motor in place and just slide the motor up until it seats and then tighten down the motor, I think that'll be a lot easier to install. And so you can see how I'm making the part of the crankshaft here. I've just got two plates that I made together at the same time, so the holes were drilled at the same time in the same diameter. The holes are 1.2 inches apart, giving the entire crank throw, like you see here. What is that? 2.4 inches of up-down movement from the top to the bottom. They'll actually get welded on 120 degrees out of phase with each other, so sort of like that. And then a third one. This one goes on the end. You can see how I've made it a lot shorter. It's like closer to this because it's going to hit on the frame, whereas this one's in the middle, so it doesn't really matter, which makes it go a little bit faster. But I'm pretty pleased with the way it's coming along. Here's the bearing. You can see it turns freely. So I'll slide them on in the right order and tack them, and when I have all three done. I'm about to work on the third one now, and then I'll just cut this piece out of the crankshaft and hope that everything's kind of straight and that it works. So it's kind of exciting. I've never made an engine before. Okay, so now I've begun welding these on. I've got the first one welded just on one side, not the other side. I'm not sure it really even needed there. Hopefully there won't be a lot of stress on it. But same thing's gonna have to happen here because I can't get in there, you know, to weld it. So we'll see what happens. So I need to weld the second one, but it's got to go on at an angle to the first one. And so I cut this little piece of paper here to you know, get the angle right, because it's kind of easy to do three relatively close when you're looking down on them, but when you have to do them one at a time, you realize, oh, the second one should have gone a little more, you know, over there or something, and it's not that easy. So I'll just use this little template. All right, still pretty hot, so I'm just going to use a screwdriver to turn it here. I think I'm going to use a screwdriver to turn it here. Come on, get in there. There we go. So it works perfectly. It moves really smoothly. So now I've cut them all out, and I have a true crankshaft here, and it still turns well. There's a little place where it gets just a little bit of friction, but I think it'll be fine. So now what I've done is I've inserted piston number 2 just to check it out, and I've gone pretty much as high as I can go, and I put the crank all the way at the top, and I made a mark. At first I made it there, but what happens is when the crank turns all the way to the bottom, if I go to that mark right there, you can see that the piston almost comes out. If you look down in here, it's pretty deep in there. So it's odd because I made the pistons 4 inches long for a 2.4 inch travel. However, some of it got eaten up down here, and then these tubes are kind of long, and so I wound up just being a little bit short, and that's not good, especially because on the tops of the pistons I have tapped a little hole. That way I could make an extension as long as I wanted to that would be outside the piston. Well, now it's going to outside the cylinder, but now it may be down in the cylinder, which means whatever I attach right here is to be small enough to fit into the cylinder, and that makes it a lot more difficult. I expected it to be out here somewhere, and I could do, the plan was to do like an L back to the head and then an L forward to one of the arms and the same thing on the other arm. And now, I don't know if I should make longer pistons, but that's one of the reasons why at first I was going to pivot about this point, but then I decided to pivot about this point instead, because this point you can actually remove the pin and then the piston, I can disassemble this thing. It's not like me to make something that can't be, you know, disassembled, and this time I kind of did with a lot of welding, so I'm gonna have to figure out. Hopefully I can work out something up there, but right now I don't have really any choice. That's as far up as it will go, so I'm gonna cut it here and weld it onto its bearing down here, which spins, and the first piston will be installed. Because I might want to disassemble this, I have, even though this side is longer and therefore could maybe, it's going to come closer to the wall than that side would, I put it this way because I need to be able to pull the pin out and then, the cotter pin out so that this pin can move this way. If I did it the other way, the pin would bump the wall because it's always along the wall and I never would be able to get it out. So you have to think ahead a little bit. And I'm not sure about this third one because it might drag, so tough choice here. Okay, so I have this problem I was afraid of. If I turn this, so right now I can't get the pin out because it's going to hit the wall. So if I turn this the other way, then it doesn't quite work. It drags along the wall, it's really tight, and nothing moves. But I had an idea because I'm a genius, and it only took me like 15 minutes to figure it out. all I have to do is drill a hole in the wall anywhere along here really, and I could just move it to that position, pull the cotter pin and slide the pin out through the hole, maybe with a little magnet. Alright, so it's official. This is absolutely the coolest thing I have ever made. I put it against the backdrop so you can see how it works. The motor will slot in very much like this screwdriver, and then it'll just turn, and basically there's my 3-cylinder motor, and up top here is where the flying crank ghost will go. But honestly, I could just stare at this thing all day. It looks so freaking cool. I'm starting to think I could maybe make a real 3-cylinder engine. Why stop at 3? Maybe I could make like a 12-cylinder engine. Check that out. That is so freaking cool. I'm so proud of myself. Alright, so here it is, finally mounted. I had a real hard time getting it in. It was really tight inside here, and I had to take a Sawzall and get way down deep with a 12-inch long blade to get way down deep and take off. There was just a little lip, and you could hardly even see it at all, but it was just enough to catch it every time. And I couldn't get this thing in and out. But I finally got rid of that, and I put it in, and now it kind of works, but it's gotten tight over all of the efforts that I've done. So you can get the idea though of how it'll move. Right here it's smooth, and then it gets to a hard part right here, and then it's really hard. The motor was not going to be able to do that. So I'm going to have to make some efforts maybe on the inside. So I think it's being like twisted or something in there. So I may have to shrink the dimensions a little bit so it's not quite so tight. Also, nothing's lubed, so once I lube it, hopefully things will turn a lot smoother. And here's the globe. It goes inside the globe, so that'll not only protect it, but it'll look cool. It'll look like I've captured a little ghost inside there that's moving around. And I don't know. I think it's awesome. I just love this thing. So hopefully you love it too. Alright, so the mechanism is nearing completion. Now I got to figure out a way to do the motor, and I think this mounts actually upside down in the arm of the mailbox. So I just need to get this distance here right, and then I'll be aligned. I hope the camera's picking this up. It all just looks black to me, but motor's in there. It seems to be in good spot. We'll see what happens. Alright, so the status of the mechanism at this point is that I've added this ring on there, which fits onto the globe, so it slides in perfectly, and one set screw locks it in. That worked really, really well. But down at the bottom, the motor just isn't working for me. It wants to walk its way out of the hole. I'd have difficulty getting these screws on in the first place once it's installed. But I don't know if you can see or not, but it's actually pushed the shaft inward. And now there's a little gap here because it simply doesn't want to stay in the hole. They're not aligned properly, and I used this coupler to try and fix that, and it didn't really work. I've tried a few different things, and it's just not working. So my next plan is to actually put a motor beneath it. That way it all just slides in. I don't have to do anything from the side, which is an elegant solution, but it's fraught with its own challenges. Normally I would put a gear on here and a gear on here and drive it that way, but I don't have appropriate gears. I have some plastic ones. There's no room here. I could pull this plate out so there's just the thin metal and the thin metal on both sides, and that would allow enough for a gear, but that's mostly my bearing too on this end, and I'm afraid it just won't sit very well. So I've decided the way that I'm going to go is I'm going to add another crank down here so that there'll be basically two parallel cranks working in unison. I'm going to try and slide it in between here. I'm just going to cut that away and add a little crank. But that's fraught with danger because the cranks have to be exactly the same. If one is a little bit bigger than the other, then it's tracing out a larger arc, and whatever connects the two is going to want to try and stretch and grow, and it won't work. So it's got to be really close. Hopefully I can get there. We'll find out today. It's kind of like what trains had, old steam engine trains had on their wheels. So that's the method I'm going to try, and I hope I don't mess things up because this was an awful lot of work. And also getting it into the mailbox is going to be a challenge because it fits in the hole fine, but there are bolts at the top that it has to clear, and it doesn't fit there so easily, and I have to kind of wiggle this back and forth. But the motor locks, so once it's attached to the motor, I won't be able to do that. unless I actually drive it with the motor, and I'll have to go like back and forth to try and get it through the hole. Electrically, it's gonna just be really hard, and this whole thing could fail. So we'll see what happens. This arm and this arm should be parallel to one another. So this is driven around and actually gone in such a way that, you know, this hung up and that kept moving, and it just twisted things until it got into this position. It's basically bound up, and the only thing I can think to do is to completely rebuild this whole thing and put the pistons much closer together. They can be right next to each other basically, because like here they're in a line. They shouldn't be in a line. There should be two forward and one back, but I make these little extra pieces on here that can come out, and I don't see any reason why, you know, I just make this arm a little different, right? So if I like cram it all together, maybe on one side, maybe use something a little bit thinner here, like I could slot this and put a flat plate in there and a bolt through, and that would make it a lot thinner up here. It can get closer together, and then maybe I can fit this motor in there with the crankshaft, you know, right in line, and just feed it right off the crankshaft. I don't know, but unfortunately this Halloween I'm out of time. You know, I have to swap an engine, and it's only 2 weeks to Halloween. So what I think I'll probably do is mount it in there and put the Ghost inside and light it up, and it won't move. And then maybe next year I can get my little engine working, and then it'll move around in there too. So anyway, kind of bummed, but learn from my mistake if you want to do something like this. I do think that I've got something innovative here, because I couldn't find anybody that did a flying crank ghost from below. They all hung from above with a kind of, you know, fishing line or something, and that's great. But if you don't want people to see what's up top, or you don't have something up top to hang it all from, you could do something like this.